Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are taking a trip to the absolute center of your head, right to the base of the brain, to talk about something that has had a very specific nickname for decades.
It really has. You see it everywhere.
You see it in every biology textbook, you hear it in anatomy labs, and if you Google it, it's the very first thing that pops up. They call it the master gland.
It's a classic piece of biological branding, isn't it? Very catchy.
It is, and the narrative that comes with it is that this little pea-sized blob, sitting in its own bony pocket, is basically the dictator of the entire endocrine system.
Right. The idea is that it barks out orders, and the thyroid, the adrenals, the gonads, they all just have to fall in line.
But, looking at the source material for today, and we're really synthesizing Chapter 18 of Ganong's Review of Medical Physiology with the systems-level view from Chapter 76 of Guyton and Hall, that nickname seems, well, maybe not totally wrong, but it's definitely giving the pituitary a little too much credit for the actual strategy.
I think that's the perfect place to start. Because if you really get into the mechanics, into the nitty-gritty of how the brain signals the body, the pituitary isn't the CEO. It's not the one in the corner office coming up with the quarterly goals.
Okay, so if it's not the CEO, what is it?
It's more like a highly effective, incredibly powerful middle manager. Or, to use an analogy I think works even better, it's a central dispatcher.
Central dispatcher. I like that. So it's not generating the ideas, it's just sending them out.
Exactly. The hypothalamus is the CEO. It's the brain tissue sitting right above it. And it's constantly sensing the environment. It's monitoring temperature, stress, your emotional state, hunger, thirst.
It's getting all the intel.
All of it. And it makes the high-level decisions based on that intel. The pituitary's job, and look, it is a critically important job, is to take those quiet, almost invisible neural requests from the brain and amplify them.
Amplify them into what?
Into massive systemic chemical instructions that the rest of the body can actually hear and respond to. It's turning a whisper into a shout.
So the theme for today is really about initiation versus execution. The brain initiates, but the pituitary is the one that executes the plan.
Precisely. And we absolutely cannot downplay the execution part. I mean, you can have the best strategy in the world, but if your dispatcher fails, the entire fleet stays parked in the garage. Nothing happens.
Let's set the stakes here before we get into the cellular weeds, because we are talking about something ridiculously small.
Oh, extremely tiny. It's about 1 centimeter in diameter. It weighs, maybe half a gram to 1 gram at most. It's incredible.
And it sits in this little bony pocket in the sphenoid bone.
It does. It's called the sella turcica, which literally translates from Latin as Turkish saddle.
A tiny saddle for a tiny but very important writer.
Yeah.
But let's talk about what happens if this half gram of tissue fails, if the dispatcher goes offline.
It's total systemic collapse. I mean, it's
Yeah.
catastrophic. If the pituitary shuts down completely, growth just stops. Your entire metabolism crashes.
Yeah.
Your ability to handle even minor stress completely vanishes. You become infertile. And in a nursing mother, for instance, milk production would halt almost instantly. So yes, it's a dispatcher, but it holds the keys to pretty much the entire kingdom.
So today, as we dive in, we're going to be synthesizing these two distinct but complementary perspectives. We have Ganong, which gives us that incredible cellular mechanistic depth. It's like getting the blueprints for the factory floor.
And then we have Guyton, which gives us the systems level regulation. It's the plumbing, the pressures, the feedback loops that control the whole operation. It's the view from the control room.
And we should mention, as we always do, that this deep dive is our synthesis and our interpretation. The goal here is to help you see the structure of the physiology so that when you go back and read these chapters, and you absolutely should read them, the text feels familiar. It's like you've already studied the map.
Exactly. This is the guide, not the replacement for the source material.
So let's lay out the roadmap. We have to start with the anatomy, because the pituitary is, fascinatingly, two different organs pretending to be one.
A very important distinction.
Then we're going to tour the factory of the anterior lobe, and we're going to do a really deep dive specifically on growth hormone, because it's such a huge part of the story.
The metabolic architect.
Right. Then we'll check out the warehouse of the posterior lobe, a much simpler but equally vital operation. And finally, we'll see what happens when it all falls apart in a clinical nightmare scenario that really tests your understanding of the whole system.
Let's start with that anatomy then, because this is really the first aha moment when you're reading about it. The pituitary looks like one gland, but embryologically it's a tale of two glands.
They're basically strangers from different towns who decided to move in together and become roommates.
That is a surprisingly accurate description. They have completely different origin stories. If you look at the developing embryo, the posterior lobe, the part we call the neurohypophysis, is actually an outgrowth of the brain itself.
So it's brain tissue.
Fundamentally, yes. It's a downgrowth of neural tissue from the hypothalamus. So it's made of nerves, axon terminals, and glial-like support cells called pituicytes. It's an extension of the central nervous system.
So the posterior lobe is essentially a dangling piece of the brain. It's physically directly hardwired into the system.
Correct. But the anterior lobe, the adenohypophysis, that's the weird one. It has a much stranger origin. It comes from something called Rathke's pouch.
Rathke's pouch. It sounds like a magical item from a fantasy novel, but it's actually, what, the roof of your mouth?
It is, yeah. It's an invagination of the pharyngeal epithelium, the tissue that lines your throat. So during embryonic development, this little patch of tissue on the roof of the mouth pushes upwards towards the developing brain.
It migrates up.
It migrates up, pinches off from the pharynx, and then fuses with that downgrowth of neural tissue, the posterior lobe.
So the anterior pituitary is technically derived from throat tissue.
In terms of its cellular lineage, yes. It is glandular epithelioid tissue. And that's why, if you look at it under a microscope, it looks like a classic endocrine gland, tightly packed cells, very rich blood supply. It looks absolutely nothing like the neural tissue it's sitting next to.
So you have the floor of the brain pushing down and the roof of the mouth pushing up, and they meet in the middle to form this organ that lives in the Turkish saddle.
Correct. And, this isn't just a fun piece of trivia for your anatomy exam. This dual origin is the absolute key to understanding how the brain talks to each part.
Because they're made of different stuff, so they need different communication lines.
Exactly. The posterior lobe, being neural tissue, has that hardwired connection we mentioned. You have actual nerve fibers whose cell bodies are up in the hypothalamus.
They're in specific nuclei, right?
Yes, the supraoptic and paraventricular nuclei of the hypothalamus. And their axons, these long nerve fibers, run all the way down the pituitary stalk and end in the posterior lobe.
It's a direct landline. No middleman.
No middleman at all. They just dump their hormones directly from the nerve endings into the bloodstream in the posterior lobe.
Yeah.
It's a very direct, fast system.
But the anterior lobe, that's the throat tissue. It's not connected by nerves. It's an island, electrically speaking.
It's completely isolated from the brain's direct neural control.
Yeah.
So the body had to evolve a different way to build a bridge. Not a nerve bridge, but a vascular bridge. And this is the hypothalamic hypophyseal portal system.
Portal system. Okay, I feel like we should pause on that term. For anyone listening who hasn't looked at a circulatory map in a while, what makes a portal system different from normal circulation?
It's a great question. Normally, blood flows in a simple loop from the heart into an artery, which breaks down into a capillary bed in a tissue, which then collects into a vein, and that vein goes straight back to the heart. One capillary bed per trip.
Okay, simple enough.
A portal system is a detour. It's a special arrangement where the blood goes from artery to capillary bed number 1, then into a portal vein, and then instead of going back to the heart, that portal vein opens up into another capillary bed, a second one, in a different tissue.
So it's a two-stop trip, a daisy chain of capillaries.
Right, and we only have a few of these in the body. The most famous one is in the liver, but this one in the pituitary is arguably just as critical.
So how does it work here, specifically?
Small arteries penetrate the very base of the hypothalamus, an area called the median eminence. They form the first capillary bed there, and that's where they pick up the chemical signals. They're releasing and inhibiting hormones from the hypothalamus.
The CEO's memos.
The CEO's memos, exactly. Then those capillaries coalesce into these long portal vessels that travel down the pituitary stalk, and they dump that hormone-rich blood directly into the sinuses, the second capillary bed of the anterior pituitary.
Okay, let's unpack the why. Why go through all that trouble? Why not just have the hypothalamus dump those releasing hormones into the general bloodstream like any other gland?
It's a fundamental problem of dilution. The hypothalamus releases these releasing hormones in absolutely minute quantities. We're talking nanograms, even picograms.
So vanishingly small amounts.
Unbelievably small.
Yeah.
If you just dump that tiny amount into, say, the superior vena cava and mixed it with the 5 liters of blood in your entire body, by the time it circulated all the way back around to the pituitary, the concentration would be effectively 0. It would be completely lost in the noise.
It would be like trying to whisper a secret to someone across a crowded football stadium by just shouting it into the wind. No one would hear it.
That's the perfect analogy. The portal system is a private pneumatic tube. It's a direct, dedicated, high-speed delivery service. It ensures that the anterior pituitary is bathed in a very high concentration of these instructions before they get diluted by the rest of the body.
A private supply line.
A direct, private supply line from the CEO's office right to the factory floor. It's an incredibly elegant piece of physiological engineering.
So just to recap the structure before we move on, we have the posterior lobe, which is basically the warehouse. It just stores and releases hormones the brain already made, and it's connected by nerves.
Simple storage and release.
And we have the anterior lobe, which is the factory. It actually manufactures its own hormones from scratch, and it's connected to the brain by this special blood vessel system.
That is the perfect distinction. The anterior lobe is a true manufacturing plant.
Okay, let's take a tour of that factory floor then. Ganong breaks this down beautifully by cell type. And I love this because it makes you realize the pituitary isn't just one big blob of cells doing everything. It's got specialized departments.
It absolutely does. Using immunocytochemistry, scientists have identified 5 distinct secretory cell types, and their relative population numbers tell you a lot about what the body prioritizes.
And the biggest department, by a long shot, is the growth team.
The somatotropes, they make up roughly 50%, half, of all the cells in the anterior pituitary. They are the ones that secrete growth hormone, or GH.
The fact that half the factory is dedicated to this one single hormone tells you just how energy-intensive and critical the processes of growth and metabolic regulation are.
It's a constant high-demand product. Then you have the lactotropes, which secrete prolactin. They make up about 10 to 30% of the cells, and their numbers can really swell during pregnancy.
Okay, so that's growth and lactation covered. Then what?
Then you have the gonadotropes. They're about 20% of the population, and this team makes both FSH and LH, the hormones that drive the reproductive axis.
And the corticotropes?
The corticotropes make ACTH for the stress response. That's a smaller but vital department, about 10% of the total. And then, surprisingly, the smallest department of all is the thyrotropes.
The guys who manage the thyroid.
That's them. They only make up about 5% of the cells in the anterior pituitary. They secrete PSH, thyroid-stimulating hormone.
That is wild to me. The thyroid is so huge for setting our overall metabolic rate, yet the pituitary only dedicates, 5% of its staff to managing it?
It speaks to the incredible potency of TSH and the sensitivity of the thyroid gland. You don't need to shout at the thyroid. A tiny whisper of TSH gets a massive response in terms of T3 and T4 output. It's all about efficiency.
Now, there's a really cool chemistry nugget in the Ganong text about some of these hormones, specifically the glycoproteins, so that's TSH, FSH, and LH. They aren't totally unique snowflakes. They actually share parts.
Yes, this is the alpha versus beta subunit concept, and it's just a beautiful example of evolutionary economy, of modular design in biology.
So what does that mean, modular design?
It means that FSH, LH, and TSH are all constructed from 2 pieces, 2 polypeptide chains that are stuck together. The first piece, the alpha subunit, is identical in all 3 of them.
It's like a generic car chassis that comes off the same assembly line.
Exactly. The chassis is the same. What makes TSH different from FSH, what gives it its unique function, is the second piece, the beta subunit. The beta subunit is the engine, or you could think of it as the unique key that only fits in one specific ignition.
The beta subunit confers the specificity.
Precisely. So the body uses this clever design, reuse the alpha part, which is easy to make, and then just customize the beta part for each specific job.
It's like buying a base model car and then deciding, okay, this one gets the thyroid engine, this one gets the ovary engine, and this one gets the testis engine.
And that has real clinical implications. For example, some pituitary tumors might secrete just the alpha subunit. If you measure that in a blood test, you know something is wrong, but you don't know which hormone system is affected. You have to measure the specific beta subunit to know if you're dealing with a thyroid problem or a reproductive problem.
So we have all these hormones coming out of the factory, and you mentioned that most of them are what we call trophic hormones. What does that term mean?
It means they are nourishing or stimulating. Trophic hormones don't do the final work themselves. They're middle managers. Their job is to go to another endocrine gland, the target organ, and tell it to do its job.
Give me an example.
Sure. TSH doesn't speed up your metabolism directly. It travels to the thyroid gland and tells it to release the active metabolic hormones, T3 and T4.
And ACTH.
ACTH doesn't manage your stress response. It travels to the adrenal cortex and tells it to release cortisol. They are messengers to other glands.
But there's one huge exception to this rule. The biggest product coming off the factory floor, growth hormone.
Growth hormone is unique among the anterior pituitary hormones. It doesn't have a single target gland, Its target is, well, almost every cell in the body. It acts globally. It's not a middle manager. It's a direct system-wide agent.
So let's do that deep dive into growth hormone, or GH. Because Guyton and Hall really emphasize that its name is almost misleading. It's not just about getting taller. They call it a metabolic architect.
It absolutely is. I mean, obviously, its most famous role is promoting linear growth, especially in childhood and adolescence.
How does it do that mechanically?
It directly stimulates the cartilage cells, the chondrocytes, in the growth plates of our long bones. These are called the epiphyseal plates. GH stimulates them to divide and multiply, a process called chondrogenesis. And then it helps convert that new cartilage into hard bone matrix.
So it lays down new cartilage and then hardens it into bone, making the bone longer.
That's the process in a nutshell. And it works incredibly well until puberty ends, the hormonal environment changes, and those growth plates fuse and become solid bone.
And then game over for getting taller.
Game over, correct. Once the epiphyses close, usually in the late teens, linear growth is physically impossible. You can take all the GH in the world, you will not get 1 centimeter taller.
But here's where the story gets a little more complex. GH doesn't always do this work by itself. It often hires a contractor.
Yes, this is the somatomedin connection. This is a critical concept. GH acts on the liver and stimulates it to produce a family of proteins called somatomedins, the most important of which is insulin-like growth factor 1, or IGF-1.
I loved this distinction in the texts. It's all about timing and stability. GH has a really short half-life, right? It's gone from the blood pretty quickly.
It's very fast. It's released in pulses, especially during deep sleep, and it's very loosely bound in the blood, so its half-life is only about 20 minutes. It washes in and it washes out.
So if you relied solely on those GH pulses, your growth signals would be these really erratic, choppy spikes.
Highly unstable. So GH goes to the liver and says, okay, I'm here. Now you take over for the long haul. Make IGF-1.
And IGF-1 is different.
Completely different profile. IGF-1 binds very tightly to carrier proteins in the blood. This protects it from being broken down and gives it a much longer half-life, around 20 hours.
So while GH is the flash flood, IGF-1 is the reservoir. It provides that steady, smooth, continuous growth signal to the tissues all day and all night.
That's a perfect analogy. Right. GH is the trigger. IGF-1 is the sustained effect.
And the proof of this system, the proof that IGF-1 is essential, is the pygmy paradox.
Yes, this is a fascinating bit of human physiology found in both Ganong and Guyton. Researchers studying African pygmy populations, who are known for their short stature, naturally assumed they would find low levels of growth hormone.
But they didn't.
Not at all. To their surprise, their growth hormone levels were normal, or in some cases even elevated. The pituitary was shouting, "Grow!"
So what was the problem?
The problem was downstream. They had a genetic inability to produce IGF-1 in response to GH. Their IGF-1 levels were virtually non-existent.
So the foreman, GH, was on the job site yelling, build, build, build. But there were no contractors, no IGF-1 to actually do the work.
Exactly. It's the perfect human experiment that proves that without that intermediary, without the somatomedin, linear growth fails.
But let's pivot now to the metabolic side of things. Because even after you've stopped growing, you're an adult, your body still secretes GH every single night. Why? What is it doing to our fat and our sugar?
This is where Guyton's focus on systems-level regulation really shines. And this is why it's called a metabolic architect. In the metabolic world, GH is often called an anti-insulin hormone.
Which sounds bad on the surface, right? We usually think of insulin as the good guy we want working properly.
Well, context is everything in physiology. You have to ask, when does GH rise? It doesn't just rise randomly. It rises predictably during deep sleep, during intense exercise, and most importantly, during periods of fasting or starvation.
Okay, so let's use that starvation scenario. I haven't eaten in a couple of days, my blood sugar's dropping, my GH level is high. What is it telling my body to do?
It is orchestrating a major fuel switch. First, it acts on your adipose tissue, your fat stores. It stimulates powerful lipolysis, the breakdown of fat into free fatty acids. It says, break down the fat, dump it into the blood, and let's use that for energy.
So it becomes ketogenic.
Highly ketogenic. It's telling your muscles and most of your organs, burn fat, not sugar.
Okay, so burn fat, check. What's its message for protein? For our muscles?
This is critical. It is a powerful protein sparer. It actively increases the transport of amino acids into cells and ramps up protein synthesis. Its message to the body is, do not, under any circumstances, start burning our precious muscle tissue for energy. We might need that muscle to hunt for food. Protect the protein at all costs.
So burn fat, save protein. What about the last fuel source, carbohydrates, sugar?
This is the diabetogenic or anti-insulin part. It actively decreases glucose uptake and utilization in tissues like muscle and fat. It basically puts up a do not enter sign for glucose on those cells. And at the same time, it tells the liver to produce more glucose via gluconeogenesis.
So it's raising blood sugar. Why?
It's all about priorities. It's telling the body, you guys, the muscles and fat, you can live on fatty acids, but the brain can't. We are saving every last molecule of glucose for the brain.
So in a famine, GH is the absolute hero. It's the master coordinator that burns your fat reserves, protects your muscle protein, and hoards the limited sugar supply exclusively for the brain.
Precisely. It is a brilliant survival hormone, but you can immediately see why having too much of it when you're not starving, when you're well fed, would be a huge problem.
Because if you have high GH and you're eating plenty of carbs, you just end up with chronically high blood sugar.
And insulin resistance, because the tissues are being told to ignore glucose while the pancreas is pumping out more and more insulin to try and overcome that blockade. It's a recipe for diabetes.
Which brings us to regulation. This has to be tightly controlled. It's not just on or off.
No, it's a constant, delicate tug of war. The hypothalamus uses two main hormones to control it. To hit the gas, it releases GHRH, growth hormone releasing hormone. To hit the brakes, it releases somatostatin.
Somatostatin, the universal stop signal in the body.
It is. It inhibits lots of things, including GH. And then you have feedback. When GH goes up and IGF-1 goes up, they feed back to the hypothalamus and say, okay, that's enough, hit the brakes. And they also feed back to the pituitary itself to make it less sensitive to the go signal. Classic negative feedback.
What about other drivers? The texts mentioned ghrelin.
Ghrelin is the wild card from the stomach. It's known as the hunger hormone. When your stomach is empty, it releases ghrelin, which travels to the brain and is a powerful stimulator of GH secretion.
Which makes perfect sense from a survival perspective. I'm hungry. Let's start mobilizing the fat stores just in case.
Exactly. Exercise, stress, hypoglycemia, all these things also drive GH up. And on the flip side, things like obesity and just plain aging cause GH levels to decline.
There was a really sad but illuminating clinical scenario mentioned in Guyton. Kwashiorkor. This is the condition of severe protein malnutrition in children, often seen in famine-stricken areas.
Yes. In these poor children, you see absolutely massive spikes in growth hormone. Their bodies are just screaming for protein synthesis. But here is the really telling part. If you take these children and feed them pure carbohydrates, giving them calories but no protein, the GH levels do not drop.
Really? The calories aren't enough to satisfy the signal?
Not at all. The body doesn't just care about energy, it cares about building blocks. The signal is specifically for protein. Only when you refeed them with protein do the GH levels finally come back down to normal. It's a stunning demonstration of how finely tuned this system is to protein status.
So we have this incredibly powerful hormone that builds bone, burns fat, and preserves muscle. What happens when the regulation fails? When the dispatcher goes rogue? This gets us into the land of giants and acromegalics.
And the clinical presentation depends entirely on one simple factor: timing. Specifically, whether the problem starts before or after the epiphyseal plates fuse.
So let's take the first case. A child develops a GH-secreting tumor in their pituitary before puberty. Their growth plates are wide open.
You get gigantism. The bones just keep getting longer and longer. These are the individuals who can grow to be 8 feet tall or even more.
But there's a serious cost to that extreme growth. Or let's go back to that diabetogenic effect.
A huge cost. About 10% of these giants will develop frank diabetes mellitus. The constant anti-insulin pressure from the sky-high GH levels eventually just exhausts and burns out the insulin-producing beta cells in the pancreas.
They can't keep up with the demand.
They simply can't.
Okay, now for the second scenario. What if the tumor develops after puberty? I'm 30 years old, my plate's been closed for over a decade, but suddenly my pituitary starts pumping out massive amounts of GH.
Then you get acromegaly. Acro meaning extremities and megaly meaning enlargement. Because linear growth is impossible, the bones can't get longer. So they do the only thing they can. They get thicker and wider.
This is where we see those characteristic facial changes, like the lantern jaw.
Yes, prognathism. The mandible, the lower jaw grows forward and protrudes. The supraorbital ridges, the brow bones thicken, giving a coarse, almost caveman-like appearance.
And it affects the extremities, too.
Dramatically. The hands and feet enlarge. Patients often come to the doctor because their shoe size has increased by several sizes as an adult, or their wedding rings don't fit anymore and have to be cut off.
And it's not just the bones, is it? The organs start growing too.
That's a critical point. It's the soft tissues as well. The nose becomes broader and thicker. The tongue enlarges, a condition called macroglossia, which can cause slurred speech and obstructive sleep apnea. Internal organs like the liver, spleen, and kidneys all grow larger.
And I read about changes to the spine as well.
Yes, the vertebrae can change shape, leading to kyphosis, which is a hunched back. It is a slow, insidious, and truly disfiguring disease that can take years to diagnose.
And on the complete flip side of that, we have dwarfism. But the books make it clear there are different flavors of this. It's not just one condition.
Not at all. The classic form is panhypopituitary dwarfism. This is where the whole gland fails in childhood. The child is small, but they're perfectly proportionate. They just look like a miniature, younger version of a child their age.
But there's another key feature, isn't there, related to the other hormones?
Yes. Because they also lack the gonadotropins, FSH and LH, they never go through puberty. So they remain sexually infantile throughout their lives, unless treated.
Now contrast that with Laurent dwarfism, which connects back to our pygmy discussion.
Right. Laurent dwarfs have normal or even very high levels of GH. Their pituitary is shouting, grow, but their GH receptors are mutated. The tissues can't hear the message.
So they can't make IGF-1.
They can't make IGF-1, so they have short stature. But because the other pituitary axis might be working fine, they can, in some cases, go through puberty and have normal sexual development. It's a very different picture.
And just for clarity, we should briefly mention achondroplasia, because that's the most common form of dwarfism people might see.
Yes, and it's important to state that that is not a pituitary or a GH problem. That's a specific genetic mutation in a receptor in the bone tissue itself, the FGFR3 receptor. And that's why individuals with achondroplasia typically have a normal-sized trunk but shortened limbs. It's a bone growth problem, not a hormonal signaling problem.
Okay, before we leave the anterior pituitary, we have to talk about what you called the other stories. And specifically, this molecule that kept coming up in Ganong called POMC. POMC.
Ah, POMC. Pro-opiomelanocortin. This is a fascinating molecule. It's what's known as a precursor protein. Think of it like a long ribbon of paper with different messages printed on it. The cell doesn't use the whole ribbon. It takes a pair of scissors and cuts out the specific messages it needs.
So you don't just make ACTH, the stress hormone, on its own. You make this big thing that contains the sequence for ACTH within it.
Exactly. When the corticotropes in the pituitary are stimulated, they produce this big POMC protein. Then enzymes come along and chop it up. And when they do, they get several active molecules. They get ACTH, which goes to the adrenals, but they also get beta-endorphin, the body's own natural opioid.
A natural painkiller.
Yes. And they also get fragments that have MSH, or melanocyte-stimulating hormone, activity.
And this explains the skin connection, right? The famous clinical sign.
It absolutely does. In adult humans, MSH isn't really secreted as a major standalone hormone. But the ACTH molecule itself has a structure that is very similar to MSH. It can weakly bind to and activate MSH receptors.
So if I have a disease where my ACTH level is sky high.
Like in primary adrenal insufficiency,
Yeah.
or Addison's disease. In that case, your adrenal glands are broken, so they aren't making cortisol. Without that cortisol providing negative feedback, the pituitary just screams louder and louder, pumping out massive amounts of ACTH to try and get a response.
And all that excess ACTH starts acting like MSH.
It spills over and binds to the melanocyte receptors in your skin, telling them to produce more melanin.
And you get a tan, a deep bronze, unnatural-looking tan.
A tan, exactly. Even in places that don't normally see the sun, like the creases of the palms, the gums, or inside the cheeks, it's a classic sign.
That is such a cool piece of clinical detective work. It gives you a rule of thumb. If a patient comes in with signs of adrenal failure, low blood pressure, weakness, and they are soupy tan.
You know, the problem is in the adrenal gland itself because the pituitary is working overtime trying to stimulate it. The problem is primary.
But if that same patient is pale as a ghost,
Then the problem is likely in the pituitary because if the pituitary is broken, secondary insufficiency, it can't make any ACTH in the first place. No ACTH means no stimulation of the adrenals and no spillover MSH effect. So pale means pituitary. Pigmented means adrenal. It's a beautiful bedside clue.
love that. Okay, one last story from the anterior lobe. Prolactin, the oddball.
It really is the exception to almost every rule. Every other anterior hormone we've talked about is under positive control. It's sitting there waiting for a go signal from the hypothalamus. TSH waits for TRH. ACTH waits for CRH.
But prolactin is different.
Prolactin is under negative control. It's waiting for the stop signal to be lifted. The hypothalamus is constantly, tonically dripping dopamine onto the lactotropes, and dopamine acts as prolactin-inhibiting hormone, or PIH. The message is, don't make milk, don't make milk, don't make milk.
So the default state is off,
The default state is inhibition. The brake is always on.
which leads to a classic thought experiment. What happens if you surgically sever the pituitary stalk, cutting off that portal blood supply from the hypothalamus?
Well, for all the other hormones, the go signals are lost, so their levels plummet.
Mm.
TSH, ACTH, GH, FSH, LH, they all crash to zero.
But prolactin.
You've just cut the dopamine supply line, the brake is released, and prolactin levels spike through the roof.
So in a stalk section injury, everything else crashes, but prolactin skyrockets.
Exactly. And clinically, that would lead to galactorrhea-inappropriate milk production and also amenorrhea, the loss of menstrual cycles, because high prolactin levels feed back and shut down the reproductive axis. It's nature's contraceptive. If you are actively breastfeeding a newborn, the high prolactin helps suppress ovulation so you don't get pregnant again immediately.
Fascinating. Okay, let's shift gears. We are leaving the complex factory floor of the anterior lobe, and we're going to the much simpler warehouse out back, the posterior pituitary.
The neurohypophysis.
Yeah.
And remember our anatomy lesson. This is neural tissue. It doesn't make hormones. It simply stores and releases them.
And it only stores two things, which makes it much easier to remember. ADH, also called vasopressin, and oxytocin.
Both are small peptide hormones. Both are actually made in the cell bodies of those neurons up in the hypothalamus, packaged into vesicles with carrier proteins called neurophysins, and then they're trucked down the long axons to be stored in the nerve terminals in the posterior lobe, waiting for the signal to be released.
Let's start with ADH, antidiuretic hormone. The name tells you exactly what it does. It stops you from diuresing, from peeing out water.
It is the body's primary water retention hormone. And the main trigger for its release is plasma osmolarity.
The saltiness of your blood.
Exactly. You have specialized neurons in the hypothalamus called osmoreceptors. They are constantly tasting the blood. If you get dehydrated and your blood becomes too concentrated, too salty, these osmoreceptors shrink and fire an electrical signal.
The signal says, we're too salty. We need to hold on to water to dilute the blood back to normal.
Precisely. That signal causes the release of ADH from the posterior pituitary. ADH then travels through the bloodstream to its target, the collecting ducts of the kidneys.
And what does it do there? This is the key mechanism.
It causes the insertion of special water channels, called aquaporins, into the membrane of the collecting duct cells.
Water pores.
Literally, water pores. Without ADH, the collecting duct is essentially watertight. Water stays in the urine and you pee it out. But when ADH is present and these aquaporins are inserted, it's like opening up thousands of tiny gates. Water rushes out of the urine and back into the blood, following the osmotic gradient.
And your urine becomes very concentrated and low in volume.
You conserve water. Now, think about what happens if you don't have ADH or if your kidneys can't respond to it.
You get diabetes insipidus.
Correct. And it's important to distinguish this from diabetes mellitus, which is sugar diabetes. Insipidus means tasteless. The old-time doctors would literally taste the urine. If it was sweet, it was mellitus. If it was watery and tasteless, it was insipidus.
And the symptom is just massive urination.
Polyuria, yes. Patients can pee constantly, producing liters and liters, sometimes up to 20 liters of very dilute urine a day. They're constantly thirsty and can die of severe dehydration if they don't have constant access to water.
Now, why does ADH have that other name, vasopressin?
That's its second, emergency function. At very high concentrations, which you'd see during something like a major hemorrhage where you're losing a lot of blood volume and your blood pressure is crashing, it acts as a powerful vasoconstrictor.
It clamps down on the arteries.
It clamps down on arterioles all over the body to try and squeeze the remaining blood volume and keep blood pressure up to perfuse the brain and heart. So think ADH for day-to-day water balance and vasopressin for life-threatening blood pressure support.
Then there's the other hormone in the warehouse, the chemical twin of ADH, oxytocin.
A chemical twin is a great way to put it. They are both peptides made of 9 amino acids, and they only differ by 2 of them. It's incredible how a tiny change creates a completely different function.
And oxytocin's function is almost entirely focused on reproduction.
2 main, very famous functions. First, stimulating uterine contraction during the late stages of childbirth. This is a classic positive feedback loop. The baby's head stretches the cervix, a signal goes to the brain, oxytocin is released, it makes the uterus contract more forcefully, which stretches the cervix more, and so on.
And the second function is milk ejection.
Yes, the letdown reflex. And this is where we have to make that crucial distinction between the anterior and posterior lobes. Prolactin, from the anterior factory, makes the milk. It fills the mammary glands.
But it can't get the milk out.
It can't. That's oxytocin's job. The physical stimulus of the baby's suckling sends a signal to the brain, which triggers a pulse of oxytocin release from the posterior pituitary. Oxytocin then travels to the breast and causes tiny myoepithelial cells surrounding the milk ducts to contract.
I always imagine it like wringing out a sponge. It's a mechanical squeeze.
That is a perfect visual. It's not opening a tap, it's squeezing the container. Prolactin is the factory worker making the product. Oxytocin is the delivery driver squeezing it out.
So we've covered the anatomy, the portal system, the factory, the warehouse, the hormones, the pathologies. But I want to bring it all together now with that clinical nightmare scenario that Guénon describes so well, Sheehan syndrome.
This is the ultimate exam question for pituitary physiology, because it forces you to integrate everything we've talked about, and it happens in the context of childbirth.
Let's set the stage. During pregnancy, the pituitary gland actually gets bigger, right?
It does. Under the influence of high estrogen levels, the lactotropes, the prolactin-producing cells, undergo massive hypertrophy and hyperplasia. The gland can nearly double in size.
But here's the crucial vulnerability that Guyton points out. The blood supply, that low-pressure portal system, doesn't grow along with the gland. It doesn't increase its capacity to match the new, higher metabolic demand.
So you have this enlarged, very metabolically active gland that is essentially teetering on the edge of oxygen starvation. The supply line is barely keeping up with the bed.
Then the delivery happens, and let's say there's a complication, a postpartum hemorrhage. The mother loses a lot of blood, and her blood pressure crashes.
She goes into hypothalamic shock.
And in that moment of severe low blood pressure, the pituitary, which was already metabolically stressed, loses its fragile blood flow. It infarcts. It dies.
Postpartum pituitary necrosis. The gland basically has a stroke from the lack of blood flow.
And the symptoms that follow unfold in a very specific, predictable order that reveals the hierarchy and importance of the hormones. What's the very first sign?
The first sign is a failure to lactate. The mother tries to breastfeed her new baby, but nothing happens. The prolactin-producing cells, which were the most numerous and active, are the first to die.
That's just heartbreaking. What comes next?
Next, she never gets her period back. Amenorrhea. The gonadotropes that make FSH and LH are gone, so the reproductive axis is shut down.
And then the slower, more insidious crashes begin.
Yes. Weeks to months later, she develops the signs of hypothyroidism. She becomes cold, lethargic, constipated. Her hair gets coarse. She gains weight. The thyrotropes are gone, so TSH production has ceased.
And finally, the adrenal system fails.
Finally, adrenal insufficiency sets in. She has no ability to handle stress. Her blood sugar can drop dangerously low, and she loses her pubic and axillary hair, which depends on adrenal androgens. The corticotropes are gone.
But wait, let's connect back to something we discussed earlier. Does she die of salt and water loss immediately? Because we said ACTH controls the adrenals.
That is a fantastic catch and a crucial clinical point. No, surprisingly, she does not die of immediate salt wasting.
Yeah.
And that's because you have to remember that the adrenal cortex has different layers controlled by different signals.
All right. ACTH from the pituitary controls cortisol, the stress hormone.
But the outer layer, which makes aldosterone, the mineralocorticoid that controls salt and water balance, is primarily regulated by the renin-angiotensin system from the kidneys, not by the pituitary.
So even if the pituitary is completely dead, the kidneys can still send the signal to the adrenals to save salt.
Exactly. Her salt balance, while not perfect, can be maintained for a while. It's a critical physiological failsafe. It shows that the body doesn't put all its eggs in one basket.
Wow. So Sheehan's is like a step-by-step deconstruction of the entire pituitary's function.
It is. It's a tragic but incredibly instructive lesson in endocrinology.
So we have traveled all the way from the embryonic Rathke's pouch, through the factory floor of the somatotropes, down the neural axons of the posterior lobe, and into the devastating pathology of Sheehan's syndrome.
It's a journey that really dismantles that old master gland myth, I think.
It really does. The pituitary isn't a dictator sitting in a bony castle barking out autonomous orders.
Not at all. It's a responder. It's a translator. It takes the neural language of the brain thoughts and sensations like I'm cold, I'm stressed, I'm hungry, I'm holding my baby, and it translates them into the chemical language of the body.
It turns abstract signals into concrete, tangible hormones like TSH, cortisol, GH, and oxytocin.
So true endocrine authority isn't about autonomy at all. It's about coordination. It's about being a responsive, faithful, and incredibly powerful dispatcher.
Well put. The pituitary teaches us that true leadership in a complex system is about the faithful execution of signals. It's about taking a whisper from headquarters and turning it into a roar that the whole system can hear. Before we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with a final provocative thought that kept nagging me while reading about growth hormone and aging.
Go on.
So, the texts make it clear that GH levels decline dramatically as we age. We go from about 6 nanograms per milliliter in an adolescent down to maybe 1.6 in an elderly person. And the physical signs of agingless muscle, more fat, thinning and wrinkling skin, look an awful lot like a GH deficiency state.
The somatopause, as
Yeah.
some people call it.
Right. So the obvious tempting conclusion is to say, let's just give everyone GH as they get older. It's the fountain of youth. But then Guyton has this very pointed warning note. He mentions the side effects of GH therapy in the elderly. Insulin resistance, edema, carpal tunnel syndrome, joint pain.
It's not a free lunch.
It's not. So here is the provocation for you to think about. Is the decline in GH with age simply a form of planned obsolescence programmed by the pituitary, a failure we should try to correct? Or is that drop in GH actually a protective mechanism? Is it possible that keeping a powerful growth signal elevated in an older body, a body that has accumulated decades of DNA damage and might have precancerous cells lurking, is actually a terrible idea?
That is a profound question. Are we tampering with the fundamental safety switch that evolution put in place? The body seems to know that after a certain point, the mission is maintenance, not growth. Perhaps the drop in GH is a wise protective adaptation, and we interfere with it at our peril.
Something to mull over. We will see you on the next deep dive.
Get curious.